I read this book in 1993. I was a young 14-year-old. You can see the date right there. I was 14 years old. This is about an SAS patrol that was stuck in Iraq during the first Gulf War. As soon as I read it, I thought, wow, I'd love to be one of these soldiers. I spent the next 11 years trying to get into the SAS, and this video is the video I would show to my 14-year-old self back then to say, mate, if you do want to do this as a career, focus on these things first. So if you're sticking around, please watch. I've got some stuff at the end which are tips for me, so I hope you enjoy it. The first thing I'd say to anyone who wants to join the SAS or a Special Forces unit is to try and understand what it is you're actually being asked to do and what it is you're trying to join. I didn't have access to a lot of things when I was young. I remember calling the base. I remember looking up in the phone book and I had called the guard room of the SAS base because there were no resources around. So I called them and said, hey, how do I get into the SAS? The guard just said, I'm not talking to you until you tell me who you are. And I explained I was a student, but he just directed me to Defence Force Recruiting. When I rang Defence Force Recruiting, I spoke to an Air Force sergeant and he just goes, look, the SAS guys are kind of old and decrepit. They're good at endurance. Can you do endurance? I remember him asking me that and I was like, what does endurance have to do with it? Anyway, I knew there was a lot more to it and I knew a lot of people didn't know much about the SAS. There weren't many people who had actually gotten in. So it was a difficult process for me to find materials and information and books. Podcasts went around, the internet was brand new. For me, trying to find out this information wasn't easy, and now that's what I'm going to put in this video. I'm just going to put all the stuff in that I think is important if you're going to try and build some of the character base that you need to get into selection. Pretty much everything else you can train for. Navigation, soldierly skills, physical training, all that stuff you can build pretty quickly. The character stuff and the traits they're looking for in Special Ops, they take more time to build. So I'm going to talk to you about them now. The interesting thing is I went on the Defence Force website and I actually looked up the attributes they were looking for in soldiers. This is all unclassified information. It's all on the website and I was pretty intrigued to find out a comprehensive list. So what I've done is I've broken this video down into 3 parts. Part 1 is stuff you can do right now. It doesn't matter where you are in life or what point you're at. There are activities and things and habits you can do right now that's going to help you down the road if you do apply for Special Forces. Part 2 is stuff you can do later. So things that are trainable, but you've got a bit more time. So you can do these in a few years or later on, doesn't matter. And then part 3 is stuff I want you to do right before you do selection. And they're just tips that I remember as being either difficult for me or something I did well. So first part is stuff you can do right now. Well, I've broken this down into a couple of different parts. And for me, it's just play hard, work hard, and study hard. Under play hard, I actually want you to start playing team sports. I want you to start playing any team sport, especially ones you can get hurt in. So contact team sports as well. This isn't 100% essential. I've got mates that went into the SAS that never played a team sport in their life. You could kick a footy at them and they drop it straight away. The good thing about playing team sports, it teaches you how to operate in a team, teaches you how to look after other people, builds self-discipline, builds focus, builds a bit of mental toughness as well. But most importantly, it just gives you that culture of putting yourself and your own needs behind the team. You know, putting your body on the line to go and save a teammate, working hard when you don't want to work hard, going to training when you don't want to go to training. All these things are really great at building people's skills and capabilities later on. So that's one, I'd say play hard. Number 2 is work hard. So if you're not in work at the moment or you're too young to do it, find a job you can do. I did a paper round and then as soon as I was old enough, I went and worked at Red Rooster as a kitchen hand. That taught me again the importance of being in a team, taking responsibility for my jobs, the self-discipline of going to work, taking pride and accountability in my job. I wasn't good at it. It took me years. Like that was just the beginning. But all these little habits were an entree, allowed me to get into the army quicker, and they served as a great foundation when I was growing up. And the final one I'd say is in this phase is study hard. You've got to know what it is you're joining. And for this, I mean, you can do podcasts and whatever you want, but I would say make sure you read and read deeply. For me, there was a couple of books I read. This one was Bravo 20. When I was young and read it, I thought it was amazing. When I go back and read it now, you realize how much of a shambles this mission was. But this was the first ever kind of peek behind the curtains of the SAS regiment. This really wasn't the done thing to talk about operations. It is now, it's pretty common. This was a good look at how the SAS works and operates and plans. So that was a good start. Another book you can read is Rogue Heroes by Ben McIntyre. This came out about 8 or 9 years ago. Pretty good read. This covers the history of the SAS. So it talks about their formation in World War II, the types of people were that joined the unit, how they were utilised, the stresses of growing up as a new unit. So that was pretty cool. And then lastly, and certainly not least, you can read this book as well. I heard about this guy, apparently a dropkick. It's me. In this, I do quite a long chapter on SAS selection. I talk about joining. So that just gives you an insight into selection as it was, at least in 2004. So there's some books you can read. There are some other ones I can recommend. One is The Crossroads by Mark Donaldson, VC. He's a Victoria Cross winner, a mate of mine. Worked with him, good guy, and his book is a fantastic insight into SAS soldiers and the nature of combat. Another one you can look at is Phantoms of the Jungle. It's an Australian history book on the SAS in Vietnam. It's pretty dry, it's pretty historical, but I thought it was a great read. So that's one. There are many others out there, but what you're trying to get is an understanding of the unit, how it's formed, the sort of people the soldiers are, and the way they think, right, and the way they plan. So going back to the Defence Force recruiting site, this I found was really interesting. And part of the reason I'm asking you to do all these tasks now is because they're so important to building some of the character base that you need. And I wrote this down. So take up activities now that show you how to operate well in a team and build high levels of self-control and discipline. So that's one. So that's under the play hard piece. Now, under the play hard piece, I would add this. Make sure you do ocean swimming and surfing, and there's a reason for this. In the recruiting guide, they had this line written down, which I found really interesting. They said, the most suitable candidates are those who regularly participate in arduous work, team and individual sports, individual or group fitness activities, or outdoors adventurous pursuits. That's really specific. That's way more specific than I thought. So when I grew up, I played Australian rules football, which is like a team contact sport. That was great for me. I did boxing later before I went into the army, and that was good too because that taught me self-discipline and a lot of self-control. There's quite a lot of nerves when you're in boxing. I did personal fitness, so I did a bit of running and weights. And when I got into the army and into the SAS, I did CrossFit. That is more of a blend of kind of general conditioning training. I think that's more suitable for military activities than just isolated fitness is. I think being able to build a trunk and strength and your cardiovascular fitness is an important one. You're not going to try and do this quickly. You're going to be doing this over years, so take advantage of that. The other one was ocean swimming and surfing. And the reason I put this down is because there was another little phrase that was under the psychological profiling they do for SAS soldiers. And this one was really interesting. So they said there are specific psychological requirements for special forces operators. In general, applicants must be capable of operating effectively at height, within dark and confined spaces, in the ocean, over or under deep water, and in a surf zone without signs of undue stress, panic, or excessive fear. I got scared just reading that because the ocean being underwater in the deep blue, like it's scary. All that stuff they mentioned is pretty scary. On the selection course, there was a day where I know they were testing kind of some of these aspects. They put us through this long, dark tunnel that had about 1 metre wide, but it was full of water. There was only about that much water at the top. So you had to stick your lips up and get a bit of air, and it was pitch black, freezing cold, and you're going for maybe 100 metres under the ground in this dark tunnel. They were testing for claustrophobia and self-control, your ability to compose yourself. Then they put you on these high ropes. They put you on a rope that goes between two buildings. It's about 30 metres in the sky. That's pretty scary because you're up at heights and you're trying to operate at heights. And they sometimes do ocean and deep water, but I mean, the scariest stuff I did in the unit involved some of these things. So parachute jumps at night into the ocean, plenty of kilometres off the coast. I don't know if you've heard about Western Australia, but we have monsters in the ocean, these giant sharks. I did surfing as a young guy. I actually started pretty late. I guess I was about 30. But just that exposure to being in the ocean, grew up in coastal areas, being used to waves, being used to being comfortable in water, the more you can do that as a young person, the better. So play hard, do all your contact sports, get all your exposure to the ocean, work hard, make sure you get into part-time work, be a part of a team, be responsible for something, and study hard. know what it is you're trying to join, read as much as you can about the unit. It's a great thing. And so the next part is stuff you can start doing later on. These are things that are going to be more specific to actually doing the selection course. So here you're trying to build some of the attributes you need for special ops training. And the part about this I found interesting is I found some research by Bond University on predictive data for physical attributes going into the selection course. Last time I spoke about this, I barely mentioned the physical part of it. I think that's still accurate. I think it is mostly character-based and the physical is part of it, but you do need to hit a certain threshold of physical ability so that you can withstand the selection course. And that's what I'll talk about here briefly. So I'm going to talk about some of the standards that are predictive of passing the selection course. The two really high tests that have a pretty good predictive quality, one is a 3.2 kilometer battle run, and the other is a 20 kilometer forced march with equipment that's about 30 kilos on your back. One is a good measure of your VO2 max, and the other is a good measure of your endurance. To be able to do both of those, you need good trunk strength, you need good leg strength, you need to some degree push and pull strength with your upper body. But what they found in this little piece of research was interesting, and I'll read some of it. They said performance time on the 3.2 kilometer battle run and 20 kilometer march barrier assessments were improved in candidates who had a greater maximal aerobic power, could complete more push-ups, attain a higher sit-up level, complete the 5 kilometer march, this is a shorter march, quicker, and jump higher. And although statistical modelling was unable to provide a required level of sensitivity in predicting selection course outcomes, brackets pass-fail, a manual analysis approach to determine a combination of Special Forces entry test standards, when applied in combination, was successful at retaining all candidates capable of passing. The selection course was developed. That's a really long way of saying the link wasn't perfect, but they were able to establish a correlation between certain test scores and passing selection. And they go on to say these standards include completing the 5 kilometer pack march in less than 45 minutes, 45 seconds, achieving above a level 5 on the sit-up test, and completing more than 66 push-ups to a 2-second cadence. So it's something to remember when you're doing your training for the SAS selection. Don't just hit the standards they want. You've got to build quite a buffer in if possible. And if you look at the Special Forces entry test website, the actual fitness standards are pretty basic. Sit-ups 60, push-ups 40, beep assessment, which is a run test, about 10.1, and overgrasp heaves 6. That's really basic. So you want to have them as high a level as you can, because if you think about the type of training you do in Special Forces, it involves standing, kneeling, lying, wearing heavy equipment, getting up, running, covering long distances, using weapons and fine motor skills after you've been doing that. All these things are linked to a good physical base across the board. So don't just meet the standards they've got, train yourself to a high standard when you're going through selection. The other one I want to mention in this phase of the stuff to do later is injury prevention. And this test, this piece of research by Bond University explained, while some instances of medical withdrawal may be unpredictable, structural weaknesses or muscular imbalances in a candidate's musculoskeletal profile may predispose them to injury. So here you want to make sure you use your physiotherapist, you use your massage, you rest as much as you can when you're training. And you want to make sure you've got good levels of strength, you've got good balance, you don't increase your likelihood of injury. The other thing to do in this phase is mental toughness, so mastering your mindset. Here is just learning the importance of resilience and stress, building confidence, visualization techniques, making sure you can see the end goal, staying positive, keep that self-talk going. I set certain rules for myself. I'm like, you're not going to leave this selection course. Only they can make you come off it. You can't pull yourself off it. So that's kind of that phase. Just concentrate on building a good physical base. Concentrate on further honing some of the traits and attributes you've got. I want to go and talk for a second in a separate section of this about the traits that you're meant to build in Special Forces. So Special Forces 13 common attributes. So this is from the recruiting page again, super interesting. They say, during Special Forces selection course, the character attributes of candidates will be assessed. While under physical and mental pressure in an unfamiliar environment, candidates will be required to demonstrate the Special Forces 13 common attributes to be deemed suitable to serve in Special Operations Command. These include the following: leadership, judgment, trainability, teamwork, self-discipline, perseverance, initiative, adaptability, integrity, communication, emotional regulation, independence, and humility. Humility, I would question that last one. Probably the least humble people on earth I've met, Special Forces people. But all these attributes are pretty important, and the different units are going to prioritize different aspects of it. For example, independence. I reckon the SAS units might value that a bit more highly. I think that that is important because some of the roles they do involve working on your own for long periods of time, sometimes in operational theatres. On the selection course, you do the endurance phase roughly in the middle, the happy wanderer phase, which I mentioned in my last video, the SAS selection course walkthrough. That requires a lot of independence, requires a lot of good judgment, requires initiative, perseverance. So some of those attributes are going to be looked for in spikes. I don't think all 13 of them are valued equally. As I said, when I talked about doing team sports, for example, or doing part-time work in something as simple as a fast food joint, they can actually build these characteristics to a pretty good level at a young age. So you can be working basically in part-time work from when you're 14 years, 9 months, I think it is. And you can start developing some of this. You learn trainability, you learn initiative, you learn communication skills and integrity. All these things are kind of buildable in these team sports that you do and in the workplace as well. So as soon as you can, get involved in those things and work hard. So in the third part of the video, I want to talk about stuff to focus on in the lead up to selection. And here I think there's some skills you can drill down on, which will really help you just operate at that slightly higher level than everyone else and give you a slightly better chance. Tactical skills, elevating your performance. First thing I do here is get the training materials that they send to you, that the Army sends, and try and stick to them as much as you can. They'll have physical training, they'll have skill building. If you can't do all of it, just focus on what you're weak at. I made sure anything that involved pack marching, or the 3.2 training, I did that. Everything else I kind of saw as optional. I probably did about 80 or 90% of the training, but if I missed anything, it would be like weight training or something like that. I wouldn't miss the groundwork, the really unglamorous groundwork. So get your training materials, stick to them as best as you can, get your rest. Everyone asks about diet, alcohol. Like, they're not looking for Ferraris, they're not looking for Olympic athletes. They're looking for diesel Jeeps that can go for days, weeks, months, getting knocked around in the bush. So eat as healthy as you can, but don't fret if you have a few bad days here and there. It's not an issue at all. You're going to lose a lot of weight in selection. So another thing I do is master essential skills, especially navigation. So with navigation, you're going to do a lot of this when you're on your own. You've got to be able to read maps. You've got to be able to do map to ground really well. You've got to be able to look at the maps and understand and be able to overlay it to the terrain that's in front of you. You've got to be able to figure out how to get yourself unlost if you are lost. So doing resections, tactics you can use to try and find high ground or low ground or boundary lines that will help you get unlost. Because it is possible when you're tired and you're out on selection, you can get lost. It's not a drama. Just make sure you know how to get yourself back on track. Conducting resections, something as simple as taking bearings to other points and just mapping that out. That can help you. That can be the difference between passing and failing the course. So make sure you're on top of your navigation. Do orienteering or team sports or adventure sports if you want, and that'll help. Another one's communication. So learn how to give orders quickly using standard formats. In the military, we have something called SMEAC. It's situation, mission, execution, admin, and log, and command and sig. Different countries, like I know there's MET-T in the US and a few other formats. Just follow the one that's relevant to your country. Make sure you know how to do that off the top of your head, and you'll be able to give orders absolutely anywhere. Make sure you're a great follower when you're on the selection course. You don't always have to be a leader, but just make sure you're contributing to the team. Don't worry too much about formal positions. They'll appoint leaders and whatnot. Your aim is to try and get that mission done, and you're meant to be supporting your team leader. If you do have a team leader, make sure you look after them. Make sure you help them succeed. Don't undermine anyone. You're trying to get that mission done. So be the one that steps up and does that. Train how you fight. So with this, I'm talking about equipment. If you're going into the selection course and you've got a certain pair of boots, a certain type of pack, a certain type of webbing or belt kit, make sure you wear that when you go out and train. Wear exactly the clothes you're going to be wearing when you go onto the selection course. I used to go into the training areas and I would march with a uniform, the pack I was going to use on selection, the boots I was going to use on selection. I'd have a dummy rifle, which is just a weight, no music, none of that stuff. And it's just designed to replicate the conditions that I would face on the selection course. Like, you can wear a t-shirt if you want, you can wear your earphones and listen to music if you want, but you're not doing it as accurately as you can. So if you want to really maximize your chance of success, replicate in training what you're going to be doing on selection. Make sure your gear's ready to go. Make sure you can handle the mental load when you're out there. Here's one for you. this is a funny one. Learn how to tie knots, and learn how to tie knots really well, because this gets disproportionate levels of usefulness, and it's such an easy one to do. Learn how to lash poles. So you get, you know, 2 poles like that. Learn how to do lashings. You're going to make stretches. You're going to build stuff to carry gear. Just be able to do it quickly when you're fatigued. Learn how to do barrel lashings, right? You can actually learn how to tie ropes around a barrel, lash them up properly, make rafts with them. Learn how to do easy knots that you're fatigued with. Learn how to do Z pulleys. Just learn knots, learn ropes, be comfortable with ropes, because you're going to use them a hell of a lot of times just for random activities, and it'll get you heaps of points if you're useful with ropes. Maintain your feet. Your feet are probably the most important part of selection. If they fail, you are going to have a really hard time. So make sure you condition your feet well, learn how to look after them, trim your nails down, use coverings on the hot parts of your feet. It's not unusual for people to lose the entire sole of their foot on selection. I've seen some horrible injuries. I actually had a really bad blister on my one. That can really mean the difference between passing or failing, is just taking care of the feet. Final one is make sure you're honest. So you're going to be on the selection course. You're going to get things wrong. The most important thing is you admit to it, you're okay with it, you don't try and cover it up. That is kind of the baseline for anyone that's joining that unit. So if something goes wrong, just admit to it. In some cases, you can even turn into a strength. I remember one night I was out, we were doing an ambush on selection. I opened my pack at the top, and something called a gooseneck fell out. It's like a thin part of a radio antenna. Pretty easy to lose. I didn't have it tied on for some reason. Checked the pack the next morning, it was gone. Knowing that I'd lost that, I couldn't use my radio. I wrote a small note down to the staff, and I had the grid where I lost it. It had a diagram of where we were on the ground, left it against a Jeep. I just drew the exact position where I knew it was. And I just went over to a staff member and said, look, I've lost my gooseneck. This is where it is. Yeah, that's it. And I said that and I gave it to him. He walked off, didn't say anything. And later that day, they came up to me with the gooseneck, gave me a punishment. But I had my radio functioning and I got on with business. So just be honest, you're going to do things wrong. It's not a big deal. You might even be able to make something good out of it. So that's it. If you want to pass, if you want to increase your chances of passing SAS selection, stuff you can do now: work hard, play hard, study hard. Stuff you can do later: build those tactical skills, try and get better at all these different fields that are going to involve physical training and your physical performance. Before you go on selection, master some of these tactical skills, everything from map reading to communication, looking after your feet, tying knots. That will go a long way to getting you in the ballpark with this type of thing. So appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the video. See you at the next one.